I'm going to pass around a sign-in sheet for everybody that comes into this. So it'll go around the room as we begin here in a second. I'll say give us one more minute. There's a few more people in the hallway. I'll cue you up and I'll start passing this. All right, come on in. We're good to go. Most people are in places. About equal? Okay. All right. I'm going to pass around the sign-ins. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Racquel, who's going to lead you through this session.
All right, so good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. What you have in front of you or on your seats is an equity quiz. I already told some of the folks who are in here. Go ahead and get started on that. It's front and back. This is Stay Woke, internal cultural competency. Hopefully you are in the right place you wanted to choose. And if you're like me and might get the itis, stay woke literally, and all of that. And I'll give you a couple minutes to do that.
1 o'clock. This was 1 o'clock. Can you sign this sign-in sheet? You're alarmed by some of those questions.
Well, the second one was algebra questions, so I gotta take my time.
Take your time. Take your time.
You need more time or something?
These are hard.
I interrupted some of their time trying to sign in. You can sign
We are going to go ahead and get started. Normally, this particular training is like super interactive. We're moving around, we're doing a whole bunch of things, but we recognize that one, it's not necessarily set up that way today, and you just ate lunch or whatever, so we will adapt to that mode. So before we begin, we're going to do some norms. Learning outcomes, sorry. I was like, what are you doing? See? Lunch, hitting me. So today we're going to define cultural humility, equity, and identity. We're going to understand how self-identity plays a critical role in the expectations and beliefs of others. Identify ways to collaborate in order to increase social capital and build capacity, and acquire practical concepts and approaches.
So, as always, we want to set the norms for the room, as we learned this morning. Very critical that we understand that this is a safe space, confidential space. Everybody's safe to be here, safe to talk, share all your opinions, even if we don't agree. I had to mess with Ms. Johnson. So feel safe in this space. Also understand, speak your own truth, and assume that everybody has good intent. I think it's very important to understand that there's going to be some things shared during this time together that may offend some, may scare some, may make people uncomfortable, but we have to assume that it's done with good intent. No one is here to be malicious, no one is here trying to be mean. We just want to make sure we have solid conversation, make sure we all benefit. Disagreement and discomfort is okay as long as we all continue to seek understanding. And finally, we have that shared responsibility, shared success. This time we share together will only be as good as you input. As much as you engage, as much as you be active in it, that'll be as good as this session will be. So with that said, we'll go ahead and go into our first activity, which I believe is called Four Corners. And so you're going to see a few prompts here on the screen, and we'll call them out, and you raise your hand if the prompt identifies with you, and then we'll kind of see the mixture of the room. Again, your responses are voluntary, but we hope you will engage. All right, so where were you born? How many were born here in Columbus? Raise your hand. Got 2 from Columbus? All right. How about in another Ohio city? 4, the Lions is represented. How about in a state outside of Ohio? Okay. Very good mix. And how about outside the United States? All right. Very good. So next one. Oh, this came out beautiful. Well, that's supposed to be my brain. So here in this room, if you're more likely to be a Johnny Cash, Steely Dan, Guns N' Roses.
No, they don't go together.
No, let me stop.
Because
Johnny Cash.
I don't know how I can jump.
Yeah, I'm really hurting right now. All right.
Cash and Carrie Underwood.
So the first one's country.
First one, yeah, let's do that one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who's country fans in here?
You know, what if you have like a mix?
There's many ones that identify.
Most likely.
All right.
Oh, it's most likely?
Most likely.
Okay.
Then it would be
Because I have kids who are CDs.
Steely Dan.
And Guns N' Roses,
I
they
didn't
don't
know
go
you
together.
guys-
So whoever had,
It's
maybe
classic
just say
rock.
classic rock.
Let's say classic rock. Let's say classic rock. Classic rock.
I like Guns N' Roses, they don't go together.
It's not meant to be.
Real music fans in the audience.
Right.
He told us to tell our truth.
Tell your truth. That's it. I'll tell you the truth. This would be more hip hop.
Outcast.
Cardi B, K.
Oh,
Dot.
stand
Are you raising your hand? I don't know.
Is it finally
I know.
neo soul, R&B, neo soul? Man, she's standing. All right, go ahead to the next one.
Now, I feel like this offers some discussion because
Stevie Wonder, that's who I want.
that's who most likely.
Jill Scott.
So not a genre, but Stevie Wonder. By itself.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. What happened to the slide?
It's all good. So, I'm very careful as I say this. You're most like this religion. So we're going with the Christian, Protestant, Muslim, Buddhist, Catholic. You fall anywhere in there. All right. The number 2, more Hindu Sikh. Okay. How about number 3, Jewish? All right. And then agnostic, atheist, spiritual, non-committal. All right. All right. Next one.
So now, normally we would do this where we're actually standing and ask you to move to a corner with people who you believe are the same race as you. But for the purpose of today, how do you personally define?
Are you talking about skin color?
However you interpret the question.
Like how do we define ourselves? African American female.
Sure.
A wasp. Yeah, same.
I've heard that all the time. So.
A wasp, when Anglo-Saxon, Protestant.
Anyone else?
You said a wasp.
A wasp, like a bee.
Oh, you want to say a
Anglo-Saxon,
You know,
Protestant.
mixed background.
And see, a portion of that is, even as you're having to sit there and think, well, how do I identify? And for some of us, we give a lot of thought to it. For some of us, I'm just Mark, you know. But when you look at this, it kind of makes you think just a little bit, because identification matters in a lot of ways. So.
Do you think this would be different for you if we were moving around the room?
Yes, like I wish that we could do that.
We can.
Just so, not for me though, but so I can be nosy. Just see what y'all think about y'all. Yeah, because I think this is, and because my household, I have different races in my house. And I ask my kids, and my husband and I, we're 2 different races. So I ask my kids how, and I have black kids, white kids, and mixed kids. Biracial with black and white parents. And, but my biracial kids, their birth moms are white moms and their birth dads are black dads. But their adoptive home is the flip side. So I ask these questions, how do you identify? Because like, we're using all different hair products and all different skincare products. Like we have like this whole big thing, but I want them to tell me, we got the sexual orientation question too, and identity too. We have those conversations too, but I'm always curious because some of my kids, they would say beige.
Instead of brown, or instead of.
Yeah, they kind of say kind of whatever they feel like saying.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting to me to see how people answer this question.
We have one of our little boys that is a twin that we're getting ready to adopt, and he is literally blue eyes, blonde hair. Like I hate to say it, reference it sometimes, but as a joke, I say Hitler's youth. But
Joe Raising.
I asked him not to talk before we came and swear
But anyway, he's like his eyes are blue as anything, and but his twin brother is you could tell he's biracial. They're both biracial. Both their parents, biological parents, are biracial, but he came out literally blonde, blue-eyed, and like
Twins, but they're not.
yeah, they're well, my father said that I think there's paternal twins and maternal, but you would never know that they're related, but they're the same parents and everything, and both their parents are biracial, but somehow he came out literally blonde, blue-eyed.
And I thank you for sharing that, because even outside of biracial parents, I have a cousin who is blonde hair and blue-eyed, and both her parents are black. Okay?
Well, my 2 kids are blonde hair.
Maybe that was a mistake and
Their
the
mom
house
is black.
Say that again.
Maybe that was a
Yeah,
mistake.
so I get that.
No, because there's some Creole ancestry, and so there's things in terms of culture and the ways that we define race that I think show up in moving and seeing. So I would say before 2020 and having this conversation with folks, what might you think people did in doing this exercise?
Only one on their skin color.
Do you think they all went to like different corners?
No,
I think they, like she said, skin
corner of
color.
their skin color.
Because like, I'm gonna tell a person I'm black because that's what they see as a black person. I can't say, you know, my heritage, you know, I have Spanish, Irish and everything. I can't say that. I'm a black person. I'm a black man. Because that's what they see me as. So I'm not gonna go in any other direction. But before, you know, growing up, that's what you said. Now it's completely different.
So what's interesting is before 2020, to your point about where people would move, people all moved to the same corner.
No matter what color.
What were they saying?
They're trying to say
They're all the human race.
They're lying.
And so,
They're lying.
right, so people would all move to the same corner. And we'd have that conversation, you know, post 2020, and we've done it, you know, virtually, kind of have that conversation. But I think, to your point about now, in terms of the difference between how people see themselves versus how other people perceive them, right? And the impact that that has on how you're living, whether you're a child or an adult.
Well, was part of that people were trying to say, I'm colorblind?
All of that, right?
Yes.
We're part of the human
Right.
race, number one.
Right.
And I'm not going to distinguish myself based off race, even though that's what the question's asking. But, so it's somewhat of a dichotomy, right? Because at one point you're trying to say, we're all equal, everyone's valued here. But it's okay that we can value ourselves even in our distinctions. You know, as you said, if I could, they see me as a black man, so that's what I am. But you know that there's much more to that, right? And sometimes I think, especially now, some people, if they be honest, they be trying to find as many ethnicities as they can to put behind or in front of their names, you know? And so it's a dichotomy that's going on. Don't want to offend people, so we're all part of the human race. But then I'm not open enough to say, well, actually there's a lot to me that it's more than meets the eye, you know? So that dichotomy is there, so. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, comments? So hopefully you have something to write with, because this is a writing, reflecting, talking exercise on a piece of paper. You can even use that quiz paper if you'd like. Take a second. A statement on how this exercise made you feel, and one realization. All right. So some definitions. So if we, okay, all right. In 25 words or less, what does this picture say to you? If you're a writer or processor, you can write it down or we can share it.
That some people need more of a leg up than others to really be equal.
Some people need more of a leg up.
I know that a lot of
So I've never seen the last one, the inclusion one before, where you were saying the spectators are wearing the same outfits as the players. And I think that's interesting, and I'm not sure how I feel about that.
How many of you have seen the image before without the inclusion?
I've seen the top one, but the bottom one I still don't get it. Can someone explain that one?
Well, the liberation, there's no fence. Now everybody can just see as they are. You don't need a step up.
This is the bottom picture you're talking
Mm-hmm.
Bottom picture, bottom left, bottom right. Oh, I guess they've got on gloves too. But I'm still wondering, I mean, it's a game where people have been a team. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think I need more help with the volunteers.
You concluded all of us, the team plays together.
That's good.
Yeah, so for those who can see the top left, tell me what the issue is in this particular.
Well, equity is meeting people where they are, so that way everyone can have the same experience pretty much.
But in equity, what's the challenge? So everyone now has access, but what's still there?
Yeah, there's barriers still there. There's a barrier.
It did nothing to the structural barriers, right? It's the idea that there are folks who can't even get in the stadium, right? They can get access, right? We can create all these things, but it did nothing for the actual system, right? We've just given them access. What does the bottom left do?
Now they can get hit by the ball if somebody.
That's good.
The last person will never be able to defend themselves because they have no glove.
They have no gloves. So essentially, right, the purpose was to remove the fence, the barrier piece there, and so now they have access and no barrier. I don't know if you can see the small people, but can you tell what color their uniform is?
It's purple.
It's purple. And so what is symbolically what that's supposed to be?
You say it. You said it.
We're all team players.
All part of the team. So it's you're not outside the fence. You're not a spectator with people doing things to you. You're actually now part of the game. You're able to participate, right? That's what it's attempting to say. But I think also your perspective is important, right? The lens you brought to it when you're saying, well, the younger one doesn't have a glove, right? You started noticing other things to it. And I think we do that as we're doing work around equity, around justice. The more we do, the more we find, too. So don't discount that.
Like what she also said, the fence is gone, so you have liberation. But when she said now you can get hit easier by the ball, is that really liberation? Like you're now free to be
I attended too many little league baseball games.
But that's a real thing. Now apply that in a real context, right? Now I have access and opportunity. I can walk in, but am I also more of a target too? Right? Like there's still things that are there.
Right.
Right?
Well, that fence could have been viewed as safety,
It could be.
but you know, like a teen who thinks they're grown, who can't wait to be an adult. You know, my rules were that fence. So now you think you're liberated because you get to have access to all this adult stuff. But is it really liberation?
I think that's a very fair question.
And then potentially, I know there was some disequilibrium about the uniforms, but in liberation, doesn't mean not having the same uniform make me more of a target. I'm not assimilated to the system.
Right.
So I stand out even more. Yeah, the fence is gone. I'm cheering. I sound like everybody, but I don't look like everybody else.
Right.
So does that increase the potential of me being, even though I now have access, I'm here. And so.
Just always looked at it as they were fans and could have been in the stadium seats because they were. But you guys are giving me lots of time.
But to your point, perspective is important.
So I'm thinking about it in like the healthcare like realm, and like when I think about like the inclusion side of it, because like an example of this is like the model of community health workers, and how like they represent the community that they're serving. But the issue with community healthcare workers, one, they're not getting paid enough, and then two, they also like have the barriers. So like I'm looking at community health workers are like the liberation side right now. Like the fence is not there anymore. They have access to the doctors and nurses for the clients. But the issue is when you talk about inclusion, you're talking about the equal pay of them not having to pay. But then like I'm looking at inclusion as like the representation. Because you look at the healthcare system alone, like there's not a lot of representation of people of color as in doctors and nurses and all these different things. And so that inclusion piece is just key because it allows, when you don't have it, it allows people to default, well, they have community healthcare workers. Well, you're not thinking about the barriers that the community healthcare workers already have and like the inclusion that's needed when it comes to healthcare.
So for the purposes of this exercise, right, and many of you have probably come across definitions for equity. Many of your organizations are probably talking about equity, right, and define it in different ways. And I think we talked earlier about the ways, like you can hear something from different people and it say different things. To center this conversation, these are the definitions that we'll use, and it's kind of a combination of a couple scholarship angles. Equity is a measure of achievement at fairness in relation to access to resources to provide similar outcomes for all. So, and thinking about that prior image, right? Really focusing on access. Cultural competence, the ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. So when we think about cultural competence, there's a lot of training. We've had lots of conversations today about training, right? It's the idea of building your capacity to be able to interact with different types of people. What we really focus on is this cultural humility piece. It's the ability to take an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented. And the reason why we focus in this lane in particular is because it challenges you to look at yourself. Look at yourself first. Identify where you are, who you are, what lenses you have, and then how does that relate to the world around you? How do you situate yourself in the world around you? Because as you mentioned earlier, we're multifaceted people, right? And presently, though it's great that we're having more conversations about race, about sexual orientation, about class, those are very big buckets of things that also are not the only things that define us, right? And so understanding who we are in relation to the world.
So, you need to get your paper back out again. Let's get some thought to. 50 words or less. In your thoughts, what is the essential role and function of education? Also, I want you to think about what role do you play as a parent, guardian, leader, manager, caseworker? And how do you develop your ideology of what the essential function of education is? Just get some thoughts on those three questions and put that on paper you want to share out.
And that's education broadly defined.
All right. So on that first one, anyone want to share out? What do you think the essential role of education is? Yes, ma'am.
Safety.
Safety?
Safety.
All right.
But now, she's the one who's school.
To prepare each generation for success in life.
To prepare each generation for success in life. Can I ask you a question about that? Okay. How do you define success in life?
It's going to be individualized, but generally just being able to sustain, to live a healthy life, whether it's physically or mentally, all of the above, socioeconomically.
Anyone else?
For me, it's to teach people how to think and also learn and adapt and like function with other people.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that there are probably some schools and some teachers where they think it's about teaching obedience as opposed to teaching how to think.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Do you think obedience is a necessary potential part of education, or do you think it should be implemented in some type of way?
Obedience is necessary, but I think there's a point where it's just about obedience, which can be the opposite of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, of course you need like obedience in a classroom for it to function,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
But if the role is not teaching kids how to think, if it's just about memorization, can you answer these basic things? And if like you do anything different, there's some type of consequence.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a very different setting.
As you said that, I began to think of Ms. Johnson's first thing, education is about safety. And sometimes it is about that obedience in the moment that keeps everybody safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I also totally agree with you. It has to go beyond that for the ability to think and adapt. Oftentimes we look at and now I'm just talking about education in the classroom right now, unfortunately. You look at it, it is still that same model that we had in the 1950s, where it prepared students to go into essentially a factory setting. You have a bell system, you move into space, just like when you go in the factory, the widgets come out this way, so there is this element that you bring to light that you have to have the ability to think and adapt in that way, so that's I agree totally. Yes, ma'am?
I think respect is a lot.
Say that one more time.
Respect. I
Respect.
think kids have lost that in the classroom. So they're not able to get the education they need because they have no respect for the teachers now. And if they don't have it at home, they're not going to have it.
I have a question. Did anyone think about education outside of the K-12 setting?
I did. I just thought of education as just teaching something you don't know, just really basic. Because I homeschool my kids. So to me, education is anything that I'm teaching that the person does not know currently. And that applies to anything, everything.
Yeah, that was my response to the second question. As a parent, we're their child's first educator.
I would hope first and forever on some level.
Yeah.
Because we should always be learning and growing, and hopefully, as parents, we're
Absolutely.
Isn't also the environment, because I mean, you have an inner city school where there's a lot of things that suburban setting, the kids aren't really necessarily dealing with. So isn't it also that depending on the environment of where the school is and how you have to, teach, and especially as far as, safety and stuff. And
I agree, but I can take it broader. I think every environment that a person is in is teaching them something, regardless of what the environment is. And I think different things are taught in different places, but I also think there's a lot of similarities that we just don't acknowledge. For example, I'm gonna go back to case brother. Easily they'll talk about inner city schools. There might be fights and things of that nature, right? Which I think goes down to an inability for people to compromise and reason, all right? But then maybe in your suburban, higher, more affluent schools, you have increased drug use. That just speaks to a person's inability to cope and reason. So it's the same issue, just being played out in different ways. So the environment teaches you something, every environment that you're in. So it's always cautious because we talk about the inner cities, there's no problem. But every environment, the home, the school, the grocery store, the conferences, they're teaching you something, every environment. Anybody else have thoughts about the roles being played and even how, I really do want to get to how you developed your ideology of what the essential function of education is. How did you come to the conclusion of what the essential function of education is?
Mine is what you just said quite earlier about the different environments. I went to a school that was pretty much affluent, and there was drug use, nothing crazy, just pot or whatever. But other than that, it was just just going to school. That everyone was striving to do, after they finished, go to college or whatever. Whereas I understand that, in the inner city schools, it's a whole different story, and they're coming from different families that it's just survival. So, whereas with us, we weren't really thinking about that.
It was taught for me, my grandparents' parents, the importance of education at early age.
Yes, ma'am?
My personal use for how I do number 3 is my passion is women and girls. I've always been like that. I like men and boys, but I love
Thank
women
you.
and girls. So in my home as a foster parent, that's my thing.
Yes.
And I take from 0 to teens with babies. Okay, so that's really, so everything that I teach is from a perspective of womanhood. and how to skillfully and artfully and master and navigate through a male-dominated, where the men are the default
Understood.
gender, and everything we're supposed to, how you make it work, and how you get things that you need to make the world work for you.
Can I ask, how did you come to that place of making that your passion? How was that?
I was born like that. It was just in me when I was born. My mother taught me, my grandmother taught me. I was taught on the very strong, powerful role of women. I learned early on that there's some power in being the person behind the scenes. There's a lot of power in being the person behind the scenes. And I know that men function a lot on pride, and which is a lot, that comes with a lot of their downfall. And women can really accomplish a lot by resting in femininity, but there's so much power in that resting in femininity. So my grandmother and her mother, actually, this is probably gonna sound crass, but here in Ohio, I don't know if you know anything about the Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings.
Yes, indeed.
I'm a direct descendant of Sally Hemings. So a lot of things have been passed down on how women do things in our family, even down to picking your circles of people you interact with. So when I have girls come in my home, I teach them, whether they're a part of my bloodline or not, it doesn't matter. But a lot of my third bullet point there is me teaching you from a woman's point of view. So like if they call me for a placement with a girl, I don't care what kind of problems you have. When my husband, he'll be like, but they come with a brother, and I'm like, how old is he? Not that I don't love boys, but I just know where my passion is with girls and women of all races, as long as they're female. And that's where my success rate is with females, and even bio moms, birth moms, same thing. So my ideology is always around femininity. And that runs everything, the gamut of all types of education and functioning in this Western society.
And respectfully, it was developed generationally. As I heard you speak, I mean, generations past this approach through the years.
Through the years.
With intentionality. That's
survival. It's a lot of survival skills.
Yeah.
And so to jump in and thinking about even just the title of the slide, because you might ask yourself, well, what does that have to do with what's on there? And I would finish that question with access to information, because I would encourage you to, if you don't know where your ideology came from or how you arrived where you are, examine those things. Like you mentioned, it was passed down. Someone trained you in thinking beyond some of the silos that we've sort of been trained to think, right? So traditionally, when we ask the central function of education, I would say the majority of people define it within educational systems, right? K-12 systems. But it doesn't ask you about K-12 systems. It's asking you broadly defined, right? And so thinking about this idea of training and learning for survival, for safety, but broadly thinking, and challenging the ways that we think about what learning and growing means. For example, just a quick anecdote, most of my experience in K-12 education has been in primarily urban schools or inner city schools. And now I work in a classically affluent neighborhood for which I see some of the same things. But my whole career, someone told me something different, right? Part of why I was brought in was I had this expertise with students who struggle, who've been in and out of the juvenile detention facility and so on and so forth, because now this community is dealing with it. It's the same thing. And because for them, they feel like it's relatively new, they don't know what to do, is understanding that piece around the resiliency and coping. And so challenging mental models. So we're gonna go to mental models. So this is a writing exercise, but it's timed. So on the next slide, you're going to see 10 words. You're gonna do your best in 30 seconds to write down all 10 words. Okay?
Maybe.
I'm not gonna let the slides get ready.
paper.
I'm gonna give them 30. You want me to give them 10, Taylor?
20.
Listen, I know this is a gifted group, but I'm not.
45.
This is 45
Ready?
minutes.
You got time ready?
Okay.
Wait, what are we doing again? Sorry, I know you're timing us.
Writing down all 10 words. Okay.
Yeah. That was harder than I thought.
And that's the, if you notice the slide does say 10 seconds, that's why Taylor interjected, because he knows it really is supposed to be 10 seconds. I gave a little more time. So what were some of the words you had?
Come on,
You got them all?
come on. I got 9 of the 10.
Never looked down, just kept writing.
So what do you have? What are your 10 words?
I got helmet, face mask, touchdown,
Touch.
referee, flag, first down, cleats, and 40 yards.
40-yard line.
Did I get touchdown?
Running back. Running back.
Do we have to specify? That's just a language.
Did anyone have words that she didn't have? I heard running back.
Cleats, I got all of them but one.
So I could have never memorized
Flag.
them, but writing them down.
So to make it even harder, what we do is have you look at it and then go back and then write it down. From there.
Yeah, that would be possible for me.
Oh, no, that wasn't.
But yeah, I don't watch football, so it all like.
So you can scroll to the next slide. Scroll to the next slide. Wait, where did the other slides get like that? Okay, anyway, there it is. So who said who didn't have running back? But you had them all, right?
Yeah, I had the 40 yards. I didn't care where he was running to.
These words all have something to do with what?
Football.
Football. But here's the thing, right? When we do this exercise, sometimes we get words like second down or quarterback. Wide receiver. Because what are people doing when they see the words? They're associating them. They're associating them. And no, as soon as they see helmet, face mask, touchdown, it has something to do with football. So this word automatically associates with thinking about football. What does that have to do with what we're talking about today? So if you go back to the mental model slide. So the challenge with mental models is they limit our way of thinking and behaving, right? So when we say things, instead of it being about football, if I said inner city, what are things that you think of?
Crime, poverty,
Black people.
gangs.
These are mental models, right? Someone said drugs, right? Here's the thing. The good news is they have a potential to evolve through ongoing learning and experience. That's that access to education, ongoing education. When you expose yourself to different things, you intentionally place yourself in different environments, you learn that some of these things, right, they may be real, but it doesn't necessarily mean that applies to every situation, every context, which are things that we often do. So we say things like, even thinking about, and it's not even to pick on you, but even think about things like masculine and feminine, right? What we associate with masculinity, feminine, right? What we associate with boys and girls, right? All those things can be challenged.
And if you haven't had the experience, like you might think art of the city and inner city, there are pockets where it's completely doesn't look like inner city at all.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you go there, you would never know that.
It's-
So I recently spent some time with a friend who really thinks about geographic space. And so, since I had spent time with her, I was thinking about, well, lack of green space, lack of accessible bike paths, something like, less sidewalks and things, because we had so many conversations that she was sharing about how space is organized in some neighborhoods versus others, and how that contributes to the quality of life. And it's not things that I think we think about much. You don't have green space, you don't have trees, you don't want to, you don't feel like you can go outside and jog down the street.
Or too often it's considered food deserts.
Food deserts, absolutely.
And unfortunately, a lot of times with some of the groceries that are there, you wouldn't want to purchase healthy food there, right?
Correct.
On the flip side,
What was so sad about the shooting in Buffalo, they finally got a rich grocery store with fresh fruits and
see,
vegetables.
Chris, that goes to a whole different place. I'm gonna
Yeah.
hold my tongue. But yeah, I'm gonna stop. But I want to. I want to say something when you were talking about the inner city and the things that were said. My mind immediately went to gentrification. When I think of inner cities, I think of gentrification now,
Yes.
right?
What's happening now?
Yeah, and it's happening everywhere. So with the continued education, right, my mind evolves. I'm like, now, if I go to any major city, I expect to see new green spaces. Here in Columbus, our downtown is totally turned around.
Right.
I vividly remember when I visited Cincinnati, Ohio. My father's from Cincinnati, grew up downtown Cincinnati in the projects. I remember going up there in the early 2000s, and I'm driving my father, and he's an emotional guy, so I'm seeing him shed tears. Because he sees the Starbucks, BMWs, all the spots that he grew up are now totally different. And so now inner city for him is not what he grew up, it's now what he's seeing today. So it's just amazing how mental models, as she was saying, can evolve and no longer necessarily be limited, because I don't necessarily think drugs inner city anymore. For me, right? Because I've been exposed to different things in the inner city where there's pockets of greatness there that people have been there for years. They're refusing to go to their properties, but they want to make the community great, so.
Yeah, but it's happening everywhere.
It is.
It's happening in Dayton, it's happening even in Orlando. They're like Columbus is a perfect, they rebuilt, you see all these beautiful apartments, but the people that grew up there can't afford them. But they're all moving out and they're all going into the suburbs because they're building lower in or more affordable apartments in the suburbs.
Yep.
So the suburbs are, and that's why you were saying that you're in an affluent area that they can't deal with, because a lot of people are moving into the suburbs because they can afford the apartments there.
Well, here's the difference. What I was speaking of is actually families that have been there for generational wealth.
Right.
And so what happens is, at least in the community where I'm serving, is that you have children who have very similar concerns as kids in inner city schools, but it never reaches to a point where you would know about it. Right? Because there's resources to hide it.
Yes.
Right?
And there's also the media.
Yes.
Right. The media isn't covering us.
Right.
Okay? They're not showing up. Right? And so, at least for that, they'll show up for other things. But I think to your point though, it is shifting. I grew up in Cleveland where, most people aren't actually from Cleveland proper, right? They're from Warrensville, Orange, East Cleveland, all those things. But when you think East Cleveland, you don't think suburb. But it's a suburb.
That's right.
Right? So those models, I think, are hugely important as we're thinking about the work that we do, who we are, whatever role you're serving in. You can go to the ladder. So here's a ladder of inference on how mental models are formed, right? So thinking about selecting a piece of data from something you observe. So let's say you're going to the grocery store and you see someone standing outside of the door. They don't appear to be going in the store. They don't appear to be doing anything other than just kind of standing there awkwardly. You're gonna add meaning to that, right? Based upon your own personal and cultural experiences of what it means to stand in front of somewhere, right? And then you're gonna make assumptions based on that. So I might say, well, when I see someone standing outside of a door where I know people spend money, they're probably gonna ask me for money, right? I might make that assumption. Someone else might say, oh, they're waiting for somebody. Someone's gonna pick them up, right? Waiting for Uber, right? Based upon your own cultural or personal experience, you're gonna make assumptions. And then you're gonna draw conclusions, right? So that conclusion might be, if you think it's someone in need, you might hand them $1, if you're used to doing that. You might say, excuse me, do you need help? You might do something based upon those conclusions or do nothing, right? Depending upon your situation. You might come from an experience that interfering might inhibit your safety. That's right? And then you adopt beliefs, okay? And then those beliefs apply to every scenario, every time you see someone standing outside that store, or a store, or a place. And then you take actions based upon that. We've seen that for the last couple of years. There's been a light that's shown on that, right? In terms of people maybe falsely calling the police. But they think their safety's because of their own mental model, right? This looks like a threat to me, right? As we talked about, mental models can be changed, right? Mental models can be disrupted based upon what we expose ourselves to, how we intentionally position ourselves, right? Okay, so before we go, take a quick break. Influences, your lens. What's your lens? What was your life growing up? We talked a little bit about that. What were your schooling experiences? How did those experiences influence your beliefs and perceptions, positive or negative, about equity or diversity, broadly defined, not just race, and those similarities and differences. So, what I would like to do, because I don't want to do this as a whole group, and I don't want to make you guys move all over the place. If you have maybe a partner or someone near you, talk about this. What was your lens growing up? We'll give you 5 minutes and see where you're at in the conversation. You can hear my voice clap once. You can hear my voice clap once. You can hear my voice clap once. You can hear my voice clap twice. That worked. Awesome. It does. Oh, man, I hate this. All right. Can you tell me? I'm a secondary educator. I was like, oh, I got to go back to that elementary school. Okay. Anyone care to share? You don't have to, but care to share. Oh, you gonna stop? Okay.
Yeah, I'm encouraged to share, is what I don't always share a lot. So I grew up in like a white suburb, and it's funny, so my mom was an English as a second language teacher, so pretty much anyone who was born in a different country in Toledo, Ohio came to my house. So I was like very comfortable with people from different countries, but my school had like 2 African Americans in it. And at one point in high school, like they started busing African American students in. And I should also say that I grew up in a suburb, but it used to be a small town where like everybody knew each other. Like I knew my friends' grandparents and their parents and their cousins, and we were all connected. And so very quickly, the kids who were bused in became like the bad students with like problems and whatnot. I never met any of them. You know, it was like a high school of like 1,000 kids. And a year later, the program ended. And yeah, and like there was never any talk about it. And it was funny how it was like a couple of years ago that out of nowhere I was like, wait a minute. Why did nobody talk to us kids in the school about like other kids being bused in? Why they were being bused in? You know, why were there no programs set up for us to like meet and talk to them? Like, and it never occurred to me, I'm like, they were probably really good students who chose to do this program to come to a different school, and like they were not prepared, we were not prepared, and like the program totally failed, and it was like it never happened. And then it put like this idea in my head, because you know, I was really comfortable with people from different countries, name the country, like I'm like, I'm fine with it. And then I'm like, oh, the African Americans from down the street, I don't know. And it was just, But like, it's something that like a few years ago, just like out of nowhere, I was like, whoa. We were just like not prepared, like everything was done wrong around that for success.
So that structure, it literally reinforced two different mental models, right? Like, on one hand, right, you're able to have this experience with folks from other countries, and then at the same time, it reinforced an idea around African American.
Yeah, and just how much like your own culture both within your family and within where you live, like creates everything that you know in a way, you know.
Anyone else? Awesome. We're gonna give you a 5-minute break, so in case you need to use the restroom, like myself, or any other, because it's sitting for a long time is really hard. Although you guys look like you're ready to go. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I'm like, ugh. I can't sit longer than like 35 minutes. Take 5 minutes. We'll start again at 2:12.
All right, we're gonna jump right back in with another activity. In your hands, you have an activity called Global Bees. And under normal circumstances, we would have a whole lot of bees. It's a whole lot of fun. We're going to do it a different way today. We're actually going to walk through this exercise together as we transition the discussion into more about identification. So, number one, and you have your options here up top. But number one, how would you define your race? How would you define your race?
And there's codes that are listed below.
And then, how would you define the race of your spouse or significant other?
I see a theme going on with me, by the way.
Uh-oh. Oh, things are good. Things are good.
Fast learner.
How would you describe the race of your parents? If your parents are both different backgrounds, if your parents have different backgrounds, list both. How would you describe the race of your closest friend? Chris, I think I'm noticing a thing too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Confession's good for the soul. Number 5, how would you describe the race of your closest neighbor? And what that means is not literally close, so figuratively, person in your neighborhood that you are feel most comfortable with. How would you describe their race? How would you describe the race of your closest neighbor from childhood?
Oh, okay. I was gonna ask that, and then there's a question.
Yeah. We're on number 7. How would you describe the predominant racial group in your place of worship or community gathering space? Number 8, how would you describe the predominant race in your workplace? That's a little bit different. Number 9, how would you describe the race of your boss? And number 10, how would you describe the race of your favorite movie star? If you don't have a favorite, think of one that you enjoyed recently. How would you describe it? How would you describe the race of your favorite author? And then finally, number 12, how would you describe the race of the majority of your teachers growing up? Now you'll take your answers on the right side of your box and count them up and put those numbers beside the appropriate code on the bottom.
Interesting.
Well, What's interesting? Do you mind
Those
sharing?
those numbers, I mean, what we associate, who we associate with.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Did you notice a pattern with yours?
Yeah.
Are
The
you-
difference.
Do you mind sharing yours?
4 white and then 10 black.
Mhm.
And then 1 in Indian, Native American.
Anybody else see any patterns in theirs?
Mine was very white,
Okay.
2 black.
Mine was the opposite, 2 white and black.
Yeah. I'll share mine. Mine was 9 black, but all the persons of power influence were white.
Yeah.
So both my bosses are white,
Right.
and my teachers growing up were white. And I was sitting there thinking, I was like, man, did I have any African American teachers? 2nd grade, Mrs. Carter. Then I thought about later, in 5th grade, I had Mrs. She was Spanish, she was from Belize. Those were the only people of color, no, take it back, a PE teacher. African American gentleman.
People you couldn't pick. Because my doctor is even a black female. I wish you had doctors on here.
I know,
For
she
medical
needed
professionals.
gender on hers, you know.
Oh, yes.
We will up that accordingly.
I didn't even think
We will
about that.
update that accordingly. Get the teachers on here. Yes, sir.
I thought mine was interesting. Mine was heavily white, actually.
Yeah, mine was 6 white, 4 black.
Travis.
I think mine was, it was mostly white, but I hit most categories. And that's due to being specific about religion and church. Our church is very diverse. I go to the vineyard, so they try to pride themselves on being very diverse. And then when I think about movie stars, I think of Eva Mendes, so I think the Latino culture there. So I tried to hit, my best friend biracial and have one person that's white. So I hit almost every category on here, but most were white.
I guess the question I'll ask in the room though is, is there a problem either way?
No. Because I gotta be comfortable. I can't.
No, although structurally, systemically, societally, it's a comment that you said the people in power were white and everybody else. I mean, just as a information,
So, yeah.
it was opposite for me.
Mm-hmm.
My boss is black and my favorite movie star is black. But, I think that that's an issue.
Is this something, I didn't realize it till I sat here. I was like, I just didn't realize,
You don't think about that.
Well, we can become segregated even as we used to try to go in one corner
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
and not become. But
yes, ma'am.
I think the ones that we can choose, like my best friend,
Right, people
we
you
comfortable,
choose.
the people in power can become a part. You have no choice with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like my doctor. Even though I love my doctor, she's one, but the point is,
right.
you
You have
know,
choices.
I didn't get to choose her, my teacher. I really didn't want to choose her.
And
But
so,
you learn about safety from her.
No, you don't know about what's That's why she's on the couch.
yes, sir.
I wonder, this is an incredible discussion, and I'm thinking about, how if this information matters. And if it does, I would be very curious to know, for like the worst case scenarios, right? If there's some type of school shooting, I'd be curious to know the evil person behind it. I'd be curious to know, like, what type of response would they have to this type of exercise? And then I'd also be curious to know, from a state of like mandated reporters, what type of response would they have in this type of exercise? And so there's that thought first, and then also to give a little bit of challenge to, like, let's say it was doctors on here, and you even mentioned, Mark, that people that are in power, have skewed demographics. I think it all matters, and oftentimes you are most influenced by your brothers your neighbors, your friends. So even though my doctor told me I'm a little overweight, should probably cut down, like, oh, I'm not moving the needle. But then when you hear from a friend or a spouse, like,
Right.
you know what I mean? So like, it does matter. I think all data matters
Yeah.
because now you're informed and equipped. And then third, because this isn't my session yet, but third, if this exercise is valuable, I wonder if this became a human resources script to include in interviews. And if I were making decisions on, if I'm interviewing you and you're 12 out of 12 one thing, does that matter?
Definitely not.
I think
And
One of the things that like we, and like I'm very strong in my faith, and so one of the things that like we like push all the time is like your world is only as diverse as your dinner table. It's this idea of like, if you're not intentional about like the people that's really around you, it's exactly what Taylor was just saying, is those are the people that really have your ear. It's the ones that like you're closest to in relationship. So that's why like I believe that it matters, because I mean, most of the time when you hear all the things that are happening on the news, you see what's in the media or whatever, that's your only perspective of people if you don't have relationships with them.
Because of echo chamber.
Yeah.
You add meaning on the ladder.
Yes,
Yeah.
that meeting. So, but if I actually have a relationship with someone who looks like that person, now I can put that person's like face to what I'm seeing and like, well, that could have happened to him. And now like, because I have a strong relationship, I have empathy for what's going on. And a lot of times people, when you lack the relationships of people of different races or backgrounds, then you don't have the empathy, you don't have that relational equity. A lot of times, a lot of people are talking about the relational equity that is needed to really drive this work forward. And when you talk about the hiring process, like it's super critical. And like the education experience, we always use education experience for like the bosses and all that stuff. But yet we're not using lived experience as like a point to really get people in those roles. And yeah, go on and on. But
So
And
Sabrina took the cheat code.
I was just going to say, I know I've had to challenge myself with intentionality to get to know people of other races more intimately. And I've had to step out of my comfort zone. You know, my boss at work, I've intentionally tried to learn about her experience, and it's been so different than mine. Because I think I was guilty of assuming, you definitely don't know my struggle. Then one day I was like, oh, but you don't know her struggle.
Right.
And people that look, because all of us have something,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so there has to be some level of intentionality where we all, because I'm a little bothered by my 9 out of 3, but I'm working on it. See what I'm saying? But that dinner table and that influence that Taylor was talking about, because that relational equity is critical, and we really operate our relational equity more than anything else, if we be real. If you sit there and actually think about that, the relational equity is where a lot of our decisions are made.
And I think, you know, along with that, right, what this doesn't take into, I mean, this is not saying that the people from these backgrounds are not in your circle at all, right?
Right.
But it's to say who's closest to you, who has influence over you. We could ask about a doctor. We could ask something different about parents and other things. And I think, you know, what's important about it is the fact that I think even geographically, it makes a difference. And I learned that, so I went to college on the East Coast, and like I said, I mentioned before, I grew up in Cleveland. This would be 12 out of 12, right? Had I stayed in my community, right? We worshiped in a Black community. I was around Black people most of the time. I think the only thing that might not have been that was my mom pulled me from my public school and sent me to a private school, which was a major culture shock, right? But when I got to college, what I noticed is, you know, I got to meet people from different countries, right, like you were mentioning. But even folks who may look like me, or proverbially, or from a Black culture that was from a different country, right? And learning about cultures and customs, and learning that, you know, to stop saying Africa, generally speaking, right? And being intentional about those opportunities, again, begins to disrupt those mental models that we don't even always know that we have, right? All of you in some form or fashion are working for the benefit of children, right? So you love children regardless of who's coming to you, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't hidden biases that you're even unaware of, just based off of what you've been able to expose yourself to. And so that is essentially the goal of this exercise, is to really think about that intentionality and moving from cultural competence to cultural humility.
I'll say sometimes, and I know that word bias a lot of times gets such a negative connotation, but I would also argue that sometimes the biases that we have are from the place of survival. We have thousands of images that come to our mind per second. And some of our biases are left for survival's sake, allow us to navigate all these images for survival. So, that's what, yes, ma'am.
When she had the slide of the mental models, am I saying that?
Mental models?
Mental models. First thing that popped in my head is the generational thing, because I'm a 70s baby. So my parents and grandparents, they were groomed for husbands. And the generation behind me, a husband is an asset. It's not a definition of who you are. It's not your identity.
Yeah.
So just the generations, their mental models are totally different when it comes to being a woman, with little opportunity to tons of opportunities available. So everything looks different to a woman who would call herself Mrs. David Walsh.
Mm-hmm.
Like their name was their husband's first and last name, versus young ladies today who have all these options for education and they're just like, Mrs. David Walsh, like I would never put his name as my first name. But that whole mental, that's generational too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like every 10 or 15 years or 20 years, like everything has to constantly be updated to match the generations.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think you could also do the same exercise looking at gender. You could do the same exercise looking at class, looking at sexual orientation, looking all those things, right? Different buckets of identifiers, you can do the same thing. It's not just about race, right? And thinking about what we know and what we've been exposed to. And generationally, I think about my mother had me a little late in life. Like my dad's not even a baby boomer, he's from the great generation. And, we talk all the time about the ways in which they see the world, right? It's just very different. And now we have 4 generations in the workplace, right? Wherever it is. So that impacts what you do. It impacts, again, for instance, we were talking about kids in school. They might have a teacher who's a baby boomer, and they might have a teacher who's a millennial, right? They're going to see things and approach things very differently, right? They're going to see respect very differently, right? So all those things, I think, play a role. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, so that brings me to cultural glasses, right? So, how many of you have heard of Robin DiAngelo? There's many things that she talks about that I agree with and many things I don't, but this is one that I do. And so she talks about cultural glasses. And she uses this metaphor to describe the ways in which we approach the world, right? So there's frames and there's lenses. The frames are those big picture ideas about groups that we talk about, mental models, often associated with stereotypes. But the lens are those aspects of your identity that are more unique based on your personal experiences. So you mentioned earlier your mental model about where you're from and those different things, but your unique lens about having a mom who was a teacher of folks who speak another language, right? Like that plays a role in how you see the world, right? Most would not know that English was not my first language. I don't even know if the team knows.
What's your first language?
My first language was Hungarian. And part of why, so they know that my mind actually is really on Europe right
How
now.
about that? We didn't know.
Yeah, write that down somewhere, right?
Because I'm actually going to Budapest next week. to be able to see my nanny, who took care of me as a kid. I haven't seen her in 30 years. And which, and so I'm really excited about that. Her name is Rushan. And part of that is because my grandmother remarried, and he was from Hungary. And he brought his niece over in exchange for her to get an education and learn English. She took care of me and taught me Hungarian before I learned English. So that unique piece, right, gives me a different lens. Growing up in my home, I ate chicken paprikash, goulash. I thought that was normal. I thought that's what everybody did. Until I got out and realized that was not what everybody did. And so those frames and those lenses are hugely important in terms of understanding who you are and how you situate yourself within the work that you do. So community mapping with your same partner describes to some of your parents, some of you work with agencies, some of you lead agencies. Describe the community that you're serving. What are some of the institutions, like if you're, so some of your kids probably come from various communities, right? What are some of the institutions in those neighborhoods? Do you know who the city council people are where you are? What's the SES, if it's different from the community that you serve?
What's
And
SES?
social economic status.
Thank you.
History of the neighborhood, annual celebrations. And if it's not, if the kids that you're serving are not from one particular community, think about who's in your care right now. Where are they from? Do you know? And what do you know about their experiences, things they celebrate? And then what's the makeup of the staff? And if you're a parent, what's the makeup of the staff of the agency that you are working with, and then we'll come back together. So I'm going to give you, we have 10 minutes left in this session, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and we'll come back together. I know there's a couple rich conversations that were happening, and I do apologize for the sake of time, because I know we have like 5 minutes left, and I also obviously took a quiz. You never know the answers to the quiz. That is the last thing we're going to do. So, anyone care to share out anything that they discussed? Couple things that we're going to skip that we would have covered, but we had such rich dialogue, is in taking that and thinking about the next steps around what you do with that mapping. There was a video on mental models, which all the slides you're actually going to be able to get, so there's links in there where you can click the videos and watch them. And then the quiz. So hopefully, before I go over the answers to these quiz, you were able to kind of take a moment and reflect on yourself. As we started in the beginning, we believe in orienting ourselves first, right? Because in order to help others, we have to really understand who we are and what lens we're bringing to the table. I think a lot of times, I'm sure many of us have been to bias trainings and all kinds of stuff, and it's all about all the stuff you should know, but if you never address self, like, it's just there, right? And so it's really just an intro. We do have trainings on privilege. We do have things on that dive deeper into some of these things beyond just what we talked about today. So pull out your quiz.
And some of them are right or wrong?
Oh yeah, there's a right answer.
I was like, I just really
But
looking
I
at
like to guess, like.
Question 1.
Some of my students like to say, oh, wait.
How many of you said so which of the following areas is poverty growing quickest in the US? How many of you said urban? Cool. How many of you said rural? Awesome. Who said suburban? Suburban is the correct answer. And it's actually related to what we talked about.
Like people
Right?
leaving the gentrified inner cities
Yes.
and moving to
So
suburbs.
gentrification coming into urban areas is forcing folks of lower economic status to suburban areas. Okay, primarily. Because rural communities lack access, right? They're less likely to go to rural communities, so they're going into suburban areas. And that's also US-wide, not just Ohio. Median household income, I'm not going to read all of that. How many of you said A, increase 16%? B, increase 0.03%? Decrease 12%? decreased 37%. The answer was B, increased 0.03%. According to a report from the Center for American Progress, schools with 90% white students receive how much more funding on average than schools with 90% students of color? How many of you said A, $733? B, $533? C, $333? Or D, $3? You all know it's not. The answer is A, $733 on average, more funding. And actually, Ohio is more complicated, which I can talk to you about offline. I know that they're really trying to come up with this like equity funding model, but it's much more complicated in Ohio. How many children die each day?
I'm sorry, I was confused with that question. Is that for the year, per child? I don't understand.
So it depends, every school doesn't use a per pupil funding model.
Okay.
So this is US on average overall, right?
But
Ohio year.
Per year.
Per year.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sorry. How many children die each day worldwide from poverty-related causes? A, 2,000. B, 12,000. C, 22,000. Or D, 32,000. The answer is C, 22,000. According to a Kids Count report, 13% of white children in the U.S. live in poverty. What percentage of American Indian children in the U.S. live in poverty? A, 13%. B, 31%. C, 52%. Or D, 74%. The answer is 31%. According to a study sponsored by the Pew Research Center, the median wealth of white households in the U.S. is how many times larger than that of African American households? A, 3 times larger. B, 13 times larger. C, 23 times larger. Or D, 33 times larger. Answer C, 23 times larger. Seven, since the global financial crisis of the 2000s, which of the following has happened in the U.S.? A, the wealthiest 1% of people have received 95% of the financial growth, while the poorest 90% of people have gotten poor. B, the wealthiest 10% of people have received 95% of the financial growth, while the poorest 40% of people have gotten poor. Or C, the wealthiest 20% of people have received 95% of the financial growth, while the poorest 20% have gotten poor. The answer is A. A, the wealthiest 1%. 8, according to the Wealth Analysis Group, Wealth Insight, during President Barack Obama's first term in office, the number of millionaires in the U.S. A, decreased by 6,500. B, decreased by 154,000. C, increased by 49,000. Or D, increased by 1.1 million. The answer is D. D. Ohio has a billionaire now. Identify this quote. You guys read the quote. Is it A, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? B, Michael Moore? C, Bell Hooks? Or D, Eleanor Roosevelt? It's A, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Did he say this in the Birmingham letter?
And last one, 10. According to a national study of U.S. parents with children in public schools, 66% of parents from families not experiencing poverty reported they always checked to ensure their children did their homework. What percentage of parents from families experiencing poverty reported they always checked to ensure their children did their homework? A, 32%. B, 52%. C, 72%. Or D, 92%. The answer is C, 72%. So I really like this quiz, particularly because some of the things you might say, oh, well, yeah, I get how that happened. There are other things where you're like, oh, I never even thought about, and some of them get at mental models that have been challenged, particularly public in the media. That Homer question is a popular one because particularly in the field of education, like they talk a lot about, well, parents don't, because of their circumstances, they don't have time, they can't do, whatever. That actually, there's tons of studies on how all these things are like not correct and come from mental models. So we hope that this was informative, it made you think, you had some time to reflect, and we'll go out and do your own reading or do your own, some of you are doing training already and doing some things out in the community, and so we wish you well, stay in contact with us. We do have a survey if you want to do that. Other than that, you have a break. I think there's like snacks and things in the hall. There's about 15 minutes before the next session.
We get better with your feedback, scan the QR code.
Yeah. And don't hold back, because I know some of y'all got, some really good feedback. So